It should have stopped at 3 minutes, but it didn't. Welcome to Mystery Path. I am your host, Asher Vane. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Your words make these mysteries unforgettable. Let's begin. If I'd been keeping a list of the top 10 ways my morning could have gone, a woman barging in with a polka dot purse and a kitchen timer wouldn't have cracked the top 1,000. But that's what happened at precisely 10:16 a.m. Just as I was trying to convince Fritz to experiment with red pepper flakes in the scrambled eggs. She didn't knock. She didn't wait to be announced. She didn't even blink at the look I shot her as I opened the door. She swept into the front room of the brownstone like she had a standing appointment with destiny. Or at least with Nero Wolfe, which, to be fair, she might have. "Are you Mr. Wolfe?" she said, bypassing me like I was the coat rack. "Not even on holidays," I told her. "I'm Archie Goodwin, Wolfe's confidential secretary, right hand, left hand, legs, and occasional conscience. You want the big man? You'll have to wait until he decides the world is worthy of his attention." She turned and stared at me like she was trying to decide whether to slap me or thank me. Then she pulled something out of her oversized purse. It was a kitchen timer, ceramic, egg-shaped, tick-tick-ticking softly, like it had secrets. "I don't have time to wait," she said. "But I think Mr. Wolfe will want to hear this." She placed the timer on the edge of the orchid stand, like a loaded gun in a bad play, and sat down without being asked. I gave her another once-over. 40-ish, nervous underneath a brave red lipstick, gray silk blouse, one cuff buttoned, one frayed. Her purse was vintage but overstuffed, the way people carry guilt when they don't know how to leave it behind. "Name?" I asked. "Lola Ramsey." "Occupation?" "I used to write cookbooks. And now I try not to read the obituaries." That earned her a raised eyebrow from me, but before I could ask what in the name of Julia Child that meant, Wolfe's voice rolled down from the hallway above. "Archie, if you are quite done interrogating our visitor like a customs official, bring her in." Now, that was interesting. Wolfe had no way of knowing who she was. No reason to interrupt his daily communion with orchids unless he had an itch. And Wolfe doesn't itch without reason. I led Lola Ramsey into the office, where Wolfe was seated in his oversized throne of a chair, framed by bookshelves, daylight, and silent judgment. He didn't rise. He didn't nod. He just stared. She took a deep breath and set the egg timer on his desk with a quiet dignity. "I need help," she said, "and I think you're the only man who might see the pattern." "I never see patterns," Wolfe said, his voice slow and rich as always. "I see facts. Arranged properly, they yield truths." "What, madam, is this object?" "It's an egg timer." "So I observe. But why, precisely, is it here?" "It's the only thing left in his kitchen. Everything else was wiped." That got Wolfe's eyebrow to flick, which in his emotional vocabulary counts as a standing ovation. "Whose kitchen?" I asked. "My husband's, or ex-husband's. His name is Duncan Ramsey. He was a food critic. The man who once called my cassoulet a culinary corpse," Wolfe said with dangerous neutrality. She smiled faintly. "Yes, I told him never to cross a man who understands time and thermodynamics." Wolfe leaned back. "And where is Mr. Ramsey now?" She hesitated. "Dead, but no one knows it yet." That earned a synchronized silence from both of us. Wolfe folded his hands. I stopped trying to look unimpressed. "I found him last night," she said. "Face down in his kitchen. No phone in the house, no computer. Everything wiped down, except that." She gestured to the timer. He hated timers. Always said they were for amateurs. And yet, when I walked in, It was ticking. She closed her eyes. It's still ticking. Wolfe stared at her for a long moment. Why have you not informed the police? Because Duncan made a lot of enemies. Some of them are vindictive. Some of them are rich. Some of them cook for a living. I couldn't help myself. So you're saying one of them served him a last course? She looked at me. I'm saying someone made sure his story was erased, except for the timer. I think that's a message. And I think you're the only one who might decode it. Wolfe reached forward, plucked the timer with his fingers like it was a piece of evidence from a crime scene, and set it precisely in the center of his blotter. This case, he said slowly, is likely to be tedious, possibly sordid, almost certainly aggravating. I grinned. That was as close to "I'm interested" as Wolfe ever got before lunch. But he wasn't done. Archie, get Saul Panzer and inform Mr. Kramer that we may be in possession of a corpse, though not, I trust, one in this house. I nodded. Got it. And Goodwin? Yeah. Make sure Fritz prepares an omelet. I wish to reacquaint myself with the subtleties of yolk texture. Apparently this case will require culinary reflection. I turned to Lola Ramsey. Well, congratulations, Miss Ramsey. You've done the impossible. She looked confused. What's that? You made Nero Wolfe care about breakfast. Fritz was already mid-sauté when I stepped into the kitchen, the scent of butter and finely chopped shallots curling up toward the ceiling like incense for the culinary gods. He glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, when I opened the fridge and reached past the duck fat to grab my coat. Mr. Wolfe requested an omelet, I said, holding up 3 fingers. Delicate, nuanced, yolk forward. I trust your sense of occasion. I always trust my shallots, Fritz muttered, then returned to his pan, the sizzle of confidence following him. By the time I made it back to the office, Wolfe had already begun what I can only describe as a preemptive mental siege. He hadn't touched the egg timer again, but it sat on his desk like a witness no one could bribe. Lola Ramsey was still in the red chair, legs crossed tight enough to press diamonds out of nerves. Her eyes followed me like she was waiting for a verdict she already suspected would hurt. I handed her a glass of water and sat. Kramer's on his way, and Saul's clearing his schedule. He'll be here in 40 minutes. Wolfe nodded faintly, as if to say that's the least the universe could do. Lola put the glass down with care. Do you think I'm overreacting? No, Wolfe said immediately. You're underreacting. If your account is true, someone went to considerable effort to sterilize a scene, but left a single anomaly. That implies design. If the implication is deliberate, so was the death. She didn't say thank you. Smart woman. She understood Wolfe wasn't offering comfort. He was drawing a line between logic and hysteria and inviting her to walk it. What was your relationship with your ex-husband in recent weeks? He asked. I hadn't seen him in 4 months. Yet you had access to his home. I still have a key. He never asked for it back. Sentimental? No, she said, lips thinning. Forgetful. Or arrogant. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do you believe he anticipated your return? No. Then why were you there? Lola hesitated. He called me 2 nights ago. I leaned forward. What did he say? That he'd figured something out. Something about his past reviews. He was frightened, which is how I knew it was serious. Frightened of what? I don't know. He said. She paused. They're closing in. I wasn't supposed to notice. Then the line cut off. Wolfe grunted softly, the verbal equivalent of raising a chess piece. And you went to his home last night? Yes. I knocked. No answer. Used the key. Found him in the kitchen, slumped forward, His watch had stopped. I checked. 8:47 p.m. The only thing moving in that room was the egg timer. "And you left him there?" Wolfe said, not accusing, just confirming. "Yes." "No authorities called. No report made. Instead, you came here." "Why?" Her shoulders dropped half an inch. "Because I know how that would have gone. Duncan made enemies, high-profile ones, Food Network executives, restaurateurs, a few failed chefs with knives and grudges. He liked to provoke, but he didn't believe in locks." Wolfe closed his eyes, as if sketching mental diagrams on his inner eyelids. I glanced at the timer. "It's still ticking." "Of course it is," Wolfe murmured, "because it was never wound." Lola blinked. "What?" "Ticking requires motion, but a man like Duncan Ramsay wouldn't wind something he hated. You said he loathed timers, so if it was ticking when you arrived, someone else must have wound it. That means the killer, or someone who wanted to stage a very particular scene, was there before you. Recently." Lola looked pale. "But why leave it behind? To mislead, or to deliver a message?" Wolfe tapped a finger against the desk. "But messages often reflect the sender more than the recipient." There was a knock on the front door. Fritz opened it, murmured something I couldn't hear, and led Inspector Kramer into the office like a storm with a badge. Kramer looked around. "Goodwin, why do I have to learn about potential dead bodies from you before I get my morning Danish?" I gestured toward Lola. "Meet Lola Ramsay. She came bearing a ticking egg timer and a missing corpse." Kramer raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "Duncan Ramsay's residence," Wolfe said. "Mrs. Ramsay believes he is dead. She found him there. No phone, no mess, just silence. And this." He pointed at the timer. Kramer picked it up, turned it over, sniffed it for no good reason, and set it down with the weariness of a man who'd seen too many puzzles before breakfast. "I'll send someone to check," he said. "But I'm not dragging CSU out there until I have proof there's a crime." "That's precisely the point," Wolfe said. "If this was merely a domestic tragedy, it would be self-evident. But the absence of evidence is curated. That, Mr. Kramer, implies design. You sound like you're enjoying this." "I am not," Wolfe replied, "but I am engaged." That, coming from him, was as close to gleeful as it got. Kramer looked at Lola. "You understand you've potentially interfered with a death scene?" "I didn't touch anything. I didn't move him." "That's not how prosecutors think." She didn't flinch. "Then get a better prosecutor." Kramer sighed and pulled out a notebook. "Fine. I'll have someone check. You stay put. And if Ramsay's body is where you say it is, you'll have a case," Wolfe said softly. "But not one you'll solve without me." Kramer snorted and left. The moment the door shut, Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, go to Ramsay's home. What am I looking for?" "Patterns. Wearing gloves. Use discretion, and don't move the timer." "It's here." "Exactly." That was Wolfe. He never answered straight when he could answer sideways. I grabbed my coat and gave Lola a final nod. "Stay here. Don't touch anything unless Fritz hands it to you on a tray." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. As I stepped outside into the noon light, the city smelled like burnt coffee and questions. Behind me, inside the sanctity of the brownstone, Wolfe was already building his invisible trap, and I was about to walk into a kitchen that might still echo with the sound of an egg timer that never should have ticked at all. The cab dropped me in front of a red brick building on West 86th that had probably looked classy back when flappers still roamed. Duncan Ramsay's name was still on the buzzer, which told me no one had filed any formal paperwork since his alleged departure from this mortal buffet. The lobby was clean, tiled, and utterly silent. The kind of silence that makes you question your own shoes. I took the stairs to the 3rd floor. The key Lola had given me slid into the lock without protest. That alone made me nervous. The bolt turned with a quiet snick, and I stepped into a 2-bedroom unit that smelled like lemon polish and absinthe. The living room was minimalist to the point of malice. Black couch, glass table, a single framed print of an antique fork. Across the room, a sliding door led into the kitchen, and from the way the morning light curved in, I could already see part of the crime scene. Except it didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like someone had staged a photo shoot for a lifestyle magazine titled Living Alone with Vengeance. The kitchen was pristine, not just clean, sterilized. Stainless steel counters gleamed like mirrors. The knife block was full. The spice rack alphabetized. The sink was dry and so empty it looked like it had never held water. The only out-of-place element was the patch of floor near the refrigerator where the wax polish had gone slightly dull. Like someone had dragged something heavy across it and tried to buff away the fact. I crouched and gave it a closer look. There were faint scuff marks, maybe a size 10 shoe turned out slightly, like someone had been facing the fridge and collapsed. So maybe Lola wasn't crazy. But the question still hung in the air like a bad odor. Where was the body? No blood, no chalk outlines. Just silence and the ghost of last night. I checked the fridge out of habit, then the freezer. Nothing unusual unless you count a single bottle of vodka and a perfectly wrapped wedge of imported Comté. The trash bin was empty and freshly lined. The stovetop had no oil stains, and yet there was a faint ticking in my head that had nothing to do with nerves. It was rhythm, the kind Wolfe would hear from across the room and call a clue. So I stood still and listened. Nothing. Then I moved to the pantry and opened the door. Behind rows of boxed risotto and dried morels, there was a wall-mounted timer. A second one, not egg-shaped. This one was square, vintage chrome, the kind used in old-school kitchens. And it was ticking, slowly, rhythmically, as if someone had set it and forgotten. I checked. 28 minutes remained on the dial. I didn't touch it. Wolfe had a rule about touching. Instead, I stepped back, pulled out my notebook, and jotted down everything I saw, down to the crimped corner of a cookbook titled The Tyranny of Taste, with Duncan Ramsay's name on the spine. Then I checked the rest of the apartment. The bedroom was, even more barren than the kitchen. Queen-sized bed with tightly tucked hospital corners, a single pillow, no dust. Closet full of tailored jackets, all dark. On the dresser, a cologne bottle, a cufflink case, and a photo of Duncan Ramsay holding what looked like a truffle with the same reverence most people reserve for newborns. The second bedroom was set up as an office. Desk, laptop dock, a locked drawer I didn't have time to tamper with, and a paper shredder that still smelled faintly of burned edges. I leaned down and pulled the bin. Tiny confetti flakes of recent activity stared back at me, unreadable, maybe on purpose. I scanned the bookshelf. A row of culinary essays, a stack of receipts bundled with a rubber band, and one oddly placed title, The Philosopher's Spoon. No library tag. Handwritten note inside the front cover, to DR, for when recipes fail. J. I pocketed it. Wolfe liked oddities, and this one ticked boxes. Before leaving, I returned to the kitchen. This time, I sat on the stool by the counter and just looked. No notes on the fridge, no magnets, no dust on the molding, and no reason for the timer to be running unless someone had been in here after Lola left. That narrowed the timeline considerably. I closed up and left the building. On the curb, I called Saul. "Tell me you're near a keyboard," I said. "I'm near a sandwich," he replied. "Make it quick." Look into Duncan Ramsey's last 6 reviews. Find out who he slammed, who he spared, and who might be willing to do both in reverse. Anyone specific? Anyone with access to his kitchen or a reason to wipe it clean. I hung up and walked 2 blocks to a cafe that had passable espresso and decent reception. I sent Wolfe a brief typed report, including the second timer and the misplaced book, and waited. 7 minutes later, he responded with 1 sentence. "Return immediately. Bring the book." When I got back to the brownstone, Lola was no longer in the red chair. Fritz told me she'd gone to lie down upstairs. Wolfe had the book open on his desk, fingers steepled, eyes closed. I handed him my written notes. He read them without comment. Then, without looking up, he spoke. The square timer was not incidental. It is identical to the one used in La Cuisine de Clément, a restaurant Mr. Ramsey closed with a single review titled "Elegance with Expired Eggs." The head chef was Julien Clément. "Let me guess," I said. "J, from the book inscription." "Indeed." Wolfe tapped the inscription. "That is Clément's handwriting. I've seen it before, on menus." I frowned. So a chef Ramsey, publicly humiliated, left him a book about failed recipes? A philosopher's spoon, Archie, not a chef's. That's poetry, not kitchenware. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. A message wrapped in sentiment. And if I am correct, the timer was not a warning. Then what? A countdown. Just then, the doorbell rang, again. Fritz answered. In walked Saul, trench coat damp with afternoon humidity. He had a file in his hand and a glint in his eye. "I dug," he said. "Ramsey's last review went unpublished. Killed at the editorial desk. Too personal. The subject? Julien Clément's comeback bistro, Maison Verte. Apparently Ramsey showed up unannounced, left midway through the meal, and filed 3 paragraphs of vitriol that made the editor blush." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Did the review mention an egg dish?" Saul blinked. "Yeah, a soft-boiled amuse-bouche. Ramsey called it a yolk-heavy reminder that some chefs mistake sentiment for skill." I looked at Wolfe. "And now the timer ticks." He nodded. "I fear, Archie, that someone has not only killed a critic, but left us a course to follow. And the entree, it seems, is far from finished. I don't often envy timers, but that one, silent now, resting on Wolfe's desk like a bomb that had already gone off, had managed to pull every thread in the room taut. Wolfe hadn't moved in 10 minutes. His eyes were closed, his lips pressed into that exact line that meant his brain was sifting through metaphors like a philosopher trapped in a cookbook. Saul stood by the bookshelf, not fidgeting. Saul doesn't fidget. But watching Wolfe the way a tightrope walker watches wind. I was the only one pacing, mostly because someone had to. "Maison Verte," I said finally. "Sounds like a salad bar with delusions of grandeur. Is it still open?" "Soft opening only," Saul answered. "Clément's been quiet for years. This was supposed to be his return. Press were invited selectively. Ramsey wasn't. He just showed up. And 3 paragraphs later, Clément's dreams were poached." "More than dreams," Wolfe murmured, eyes still shut. Julien Clément was once the darling of the Nouvelle American movement. He was supposed to be the next Escoffier. Then Ramsey's review of his Midtown venture ended him. "That was 12 years ago," I said. "Time means nothing to pride," Wolfe replied. Clément was humiliated, left the country, taught in obscure academies in Lyon. And now, just as he attempts a resurrection, Ramsey appears uninvited and writes a review that never sees daylight. He opened his eyes. No, Archie. The man who left that book in the kitchen wasn't warning Duncan Ramsay. He was reminding him. I sat. So you're saying Clement killed Ramsay because of the first review, not the second? I'm saying he intended to. Whether Ramsay is truly dead remains to be proven. But symbolically, the act has already occurred. Saul raised a brow. You think the egg timer was for show? Wolfe gave a small shrug, which, for him, was practically an aria. A dish is plated for its visual appeal. Why not a murder? He gestured toward the phone. Call Clement, invite him here. Use whatever pretext you prefer, but ensure he comes. Willingly? I didn't ask what Wolfe planned to say when the chef walked into the lion's den. You don't ask the lion if it's hungry, you just get out of the way. Saul stayed behind as I went to the dining room phone. Maison Verte picked up on the second ring. Maison Verte, we are not yet accepting reservations. Good, I'm not hungry, I said. I'm calling on behalf of Nero Wolfe. He'd like to discuss something culinary. Privately. The pause on the other end was shorter than I expected. I will come, said a voice, low, clipped, with a trace of old Paris under the vowels. When? Now would be excellent. Click. I returned to the office. Wolfe hadn't moved. He's on his way, I said. Good. Fritz entered with a tray. 3 tulip glasses, a decanter of sherry, and a small bowl of almonds roasted in duck fat. Wolfe gestured for him to set it down, and then dismissed him with a glance. Fritz left silently, though I could tell he disapproved of welcoming guests without proper napkins. 20 minutes later, the bell rang again. Fritz led in a man who could have been carved from French granite. Tall, pale, severe. Julien Clement wore a black suit with no tie and a lapel pin shaped like a sprig of rosemary. His shoes were polished. His eyes were not. Mr. Wolfe, he said, with a slight incline of his head. I had not expected to be summoned by a man who dines so infrequently in public. I seldom leave the house, Wolfe said. But I do appreciate precision on a plate or on a person. Then I am honored, Clement replied, though his tone left room for interpretation. I rose, shook his hand, and offered him the chair across from Wolfe. He sat. His posture was erect, almost military. Wolfe steepled his fingers. You were acquainted with Duncan Ramsay. Clement's lips thinned. I was acquainted with his cruelty. But you sent him a book? The chef's eyes flicked to the copy of The Philosopher's Spoon on Wolfe's desk. That was symbolic. Of what? Closure. Forgiveness. Perhaps something else. Revenge? Clement didn't flinch. You think I killed him? I think someone curated the scene of his death with the same attention you would give a reduction sauce. Clement leaned forward. Duncan Ramsay destroyed my career. He published lies, ridiculed my technique, called me a technician without instinct. My investors vanished within a week. Do I hate him? Yes. But I would never kill a man who can't taste what I've become. That's a curious way to phrase it, I said. You make it sound as if murder would deny you something more personal. It would. I wanted him to see, to eat, to acknowledge that I had surpassed his judgment. Wolfe nodded slowly. You didn't invite him to your opening. Number, but I knew he would come. He couldn't resist. So you served him the amuse-bouche. Clement smiled. An egg, soft-boiled. Precisely 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Perfect every time. And the timer? Wolfe asked, tapping the ceramic egg on the desk. Clement frowned. That is not mine. Wolfe reached under the desk, pulled out the second timer, the vintage chrome one from Ramsay's kitchen, and placed it beside the first. This? Clément's eyebrows lifted. Yes, that was mine. A gift from my father. I haven't seen it in years. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who else had access to it? Clément shrugged. Anyone. It was in storage when I left the country. My apartment was sold. Some things vanished. Convenient. I do not lie, Clément said firmly. I didn't say you did, but perhaps someone else wanted the story to point to you. Saul stepped forward. Chef, who else was present at the soft opening? Clément thought. My sous chef, a few investors, Ramsey, uninvited, and a food vlogger named Callie Devane. She was recording. Recording what? I asked. A behind-the-scenes tour. I believe she captured the moment Ramsey arrived. He was not subtle. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. Archie, he said, find Miss Devane. Obtain the footage. If Ramsey was murdered, the motive may not be Clément's resentment, but someone else's anticipation of it. Clément rose. Am I free to go? You are, Wolfe said, but remain reachable. We may dine together yet. The chef left with his spine unbowed. I looked at Wolfe. You believe him? I believe his ego, Wolfe said. It doesn't lie. But someone else may have used it, like seasoning, in a dish meant for someone else's palate. He closed his eyes again. Now go. We must find the next ingredient. The thing about finding food vloggers is that they want to be found. Callie Devane had an entire ecosystem online, videos, reels, links, thumbnails, and a curated feed full of euphoric reactions to foie gras and artisanal toast. A few clicks, a phone call, and some mild manipulation involving my invented status as Wolfe's culinary media liaison. And I had an appointment to meet her in a studio apartment above a juice bar on West 23rd. She greeted me in leopard print slippers and an oversized t-shirt that read, "Beat me to it," holding a camera rig in one hand and a cup of green foam in the other. Her hair was a tangle of chaotic curls that somehow managed to look intentional. You're early, she said, not sounding remotely bothered. I'm always early when it comes to murder. That got her attention. Wait, is this about Duncan Ramsey? Among others. Her eyes flicked sideways, calculating something that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with exclusivity. She motioned me inside. The space smelled like hibiscus oil and ring lights. A laptop sat on a tripod. Behind it, a collapsible background printed with floating herbs and dripping cheese. She was building her empire one slow-motion drizzle at a time. I was told you recorded the soft opening at Maison Verte, I said, settling onto a beanbag chair that made me feel like I'd stepped into a bad improv show. Some of it, not the whole meal. Clément asked me to turn off the camera during the actual courses, said it was about presence, but I got the walk-in, reactions, guests, ambiance. That what you want? Start with Ramsey. She raised an eyebrow, then slid over to her laptop and tapped a few keys. A window opened, and the screen flickered to life. There, she said. Time code's about 16 minutes in. That's when things got weird. I watched. Ramsey came in through the side door, not the front, wearing a camel trench coat and a look that could wilt parsley. Heads turned. He didn't speak, just scanned the room, nodded to no one in particular, and walked straight past Clément without acknowledgement. That wasn't RSVP, she said. He wasn't on the guest list. Did anyone stop him? Nope. Clement froze like his soul had hiccuped, but then he did this weird nod, like, fine, game on. The video continued. Ramsey seated himself at the rear corner of the bistro, alone. Clément disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, a waiter approached with what looked like a shallow egg cup and tiny spoon. Ramsey didn't smile, but he did lift the spoon delicately. It closed his eyes, then leaned back like a judge passing a silent verdict. Did he stay for the whole meal? I asked. Number left before the second course. Never touched the bread. Looked like he'd been there for a funeral, and I think Clement knew it. She paused the footage. I thought it was just drama. Chef versus critic. But now you're saying... I'm saying Ramsey may not have made it home alive. She went quiet. The kind of quiet that means you're replaying a dozen moments with new meaning. Did anyone follow him out? She clicked again, rewound a few seconds. Not exactly. Watch, I leaned in. As Ramsey left the table and headed toward the rear door, a woman stood up from a nearby seat, barely in frame. Red coat, high collar, dark hair. She wasn't following him so much as trailing. Subtle. She left her wine half full and exited exactly 10 seconds after he did. Who's that? Not sure, Callie said. She wasn't a chef. I figured maybe press. But she wasn't holding a camera or taking notes. I paused the video, zoomed in as far as the pixelation would allow. She was older than most of the influencers and restaurant managers in the room. Late 40s, maybe 50s. Sharp posture, familiar in a way I couldn't place, something in the shoulders. Did she give her name? I can check, she said, opening a spreadsheet of RSVP emails. Most of the list came through Clement's publicist. Hold on, here. There was a Regina Marchand listed. No title, no outlet, just observer. Marchand, I repeated. As in, Marchand Publishing? Is that something? It is, if you know who used to own the food section of the Herald. She blinked. Wait, wasn't that Ramsey's first editor, and later his ex-girlfriend? Callie sat back slowly. So, what? She's involved? I don't know yet, but I'll need a copy of this footage. Wolfe will want to see it. She handed me a USB without protest. Here. But if this becomes a scandal, I want credit. If it becomes a scandal, I said, you'll be lucky not to be subpoenaed. That didn't seem to scare her. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe had already cleared the desk of everything but a blank legal pad and the book Clement had signed. He didn't speak as I walked in, just gestured. I handed him the USB. He inserted it into the side of his ancient laptop like he was feeding a slot machine and opened the file. As the footage played, he leaned forward slightly, nostrils flaring as if sniffing ingredients instead of intentions. When the woman in red came into view, he froze the screen. That, he said, is not Regina Marchand. I frowned, but Callie had her on the guest list. She had a name on a spreadsheet, but that face belongs to someone else. Archie, fetch the green file on past contributors to Gourmand Weekly. Top shelf, far left. I obeyed. Wolfe opened the file, flipped through 3 clippings, and pointed. There she was, 10 years younger, but unmistakable. Lisette Durant, he said. Freelance culinary ghostwriter, once worked under Marchand, also briefly engaged to Duncan Ramsey, though it ended abruptly. I sat back. So she had motive, proximity, and used Marchand's name to attend? Wolfe nodded. And she followed him out after the amuse-bouche, meaning she knew where he was going. Saul, who'd returned at some point and taken up silent residence by the orchid window, spoke up. I'll find her. Fast. No, Wolfe said. Let her come to us. Archie, call Miss Durant. Use her real name. Tell her we know she was there. Tell her Wolfe has tasted the yolk of this affair, and it has curdled. I stared at him. That's the line you want me to use? She will understand. so I called. Her number wasn't difficult to locate. Food writers leave trails. When she answered, her voice was cool and composed. "Miss Durant," I said. "This is Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. He'd like to speak to you, immediately." "I'm busy." "He asked me to tell you that he has tasted the yolk of this affair, and it has curdled." There was silence. Then, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Wolfe closed his laptop. "Prepare the chairs, Archie. Our next course is confession." Lisette Durant arrived at the brownstone 26 minutes after I hung up. She wore the same crimson coat from the footage, though now buttoned high against the summer heat, like a scarlet exclamation mark. Her gloves were leather, her lipstick a deliberate shade of defiance. If she was here to feign innocence, she'd brought a wardrobe full of contradictions. Fritz showed her into the office. Wolfe, as always, didn't stand. Saul remained seated in the far corner, not introduced, not unnoticed. I offered her the red chair across from Wolfe's desk. She didn't hesitate. "Nero Wolfe," she said, like addressing a menu she didn't intend to order from. "Miss Durant?" he replied, voice smooth, eyes heavy-lidded. "You've been using someone else's name." I didn't see the harm. Regina was out of town. I needed access. And access you obtained. I wasn't hiding. I was observing. It's what I do. "You followed Duncan Ramsay out the door of Maison Verte." She looked at me, then back at Wolfe. "Yes." And then, I walked 2 blocks behind him. He didn't look back. I didn't speak to him. I just wanted to see where he went. Wolfe tapped the armrest of his chair once, then folded his hands over his stomach. "You're not here for pleasantries," she said. "So ask. Did you kill him?" "No." "Did you see who did?" She hesitated. "No." "But you saw where he went?" "To his building. West 86th. I stayed across the street. I saw the lights go on in his unit. Then, nothing. After about 20 minutes, they went out." "And you left?" "Yes." "No one else entered?" "Not that I saw." "No sounds? No car pulling up, and no suspicious glances over the shoulder?" She exhaled sharply. "You think I planned a murder with that much flair? That timer? That scene? I'm a writer, Mr. Wolfe, not a dramatist. There is often overlap." She almost smiled at that. I studied her while Wolfe remained still. Her nails were short and unpainted. Her eyes showed calculation more than grief. But not guilt. Not yet. Wolfe opened a drawer and removed a copy of Ramsay's unpublished review, the one Saul had retrieved from the editorial desk. "You are familiar with this?" "I know he wrote it. I haven't read it." He handed it to her. "Then read." She skimmed. Her face shifted by millimeters. Annoyance, recognition, and finally a weary sort of disgust. "He couldn't help himself," she said, "even when he knew no one would publish it. This was just for him." He accused Clement of manipulation, culinary plagiarism, and vanity masquerading as redemption. She nodded. Because that's how Duncan operated. He didn't just eat the food. He dissected the person who made it. You were once engaged. A mistake of long ago. Why attend the dinner? Because I thought I was over him. And because I knew he wouldn't let Julian rise again without trying to sabotage it. I was curious how far he'd go. And now he's vanished. She stared at Wolfe. "You still don't have a body, do you?" "No." "Then maybe stop speaking in the past tense." Wolfe didn't answer. He simply gestured toward the egg timer, the ceramic one, the one Lola had brought. Lisette looked at it, and something small passed through her expression, a flicker like the ghost of a memory. "That's not mine," she said. "It was left in Ramsay's kitchen, the only item untouched. I saw one like it, Once. Where? In his office. He kept it on a shelf as a joke. Said it reminded him that cooking, like criticism, had a time limit. Was it this exact one? Number his was cracked. This looks new. Are you certain? I'm not a collector of props. No, Wolfe agreed. You collect stories? She nodded, then leaned forward. What exactly are you trying to prove? That someone anticipated Ramsey's death or disappearance and curated a symbolic scene, possibly to confuse, possibly to accuse. You think it was me? I think it was someone who knew him well enough to understand how he'd be interpreted. She sat back. Then I suggest you look at his protégés. He had a habit of creating shadows and then stepping on them. One of them might have finally learned to push back. Wolfe turned his head toward me slightly. It was the smallest cue, but I knew what he meant. Names, I said. Give us one. She didn't hesitate. Jonas Venn. Young, bright, angry. Ramsey featured him in 3 columns 5 years ago, then turned on him when Jonas opened a food truck that got too popular. Called it culinary regression in a paper basket. Wolfe grunted. He moved to Brooklyn, she continued. Opened a place called Crux. Minimalist dining, reclaimed wood, candlelight, and disappointment. Did he attend Maison Verte's opening? Number not on the list. But I heard he'd sent someone to scout it. Who? His sous chef. Name's Harper Chen. Saul finally spoke. I know her. Used to bartend in Chelsea. Short fuse, sharp knives. Lisette rose. If Ramsey is dead, it's not because of a love affair. It's because he created enemies everywhere he went. Wolfe nodded once. And you? She tilted her head. I buried my reasons years ago. He didn't press further. Thank you, he said simply. We may speak again. When she left, the air in the room relaxed by a fraction. Wolfe looked to Saul. Find Jonas Venn. Interview him. No confrontation yet, just observation. Saul nodded and vanished without a word. I turned to Wolfe. You believe her? I believe she knows more than she said, but she also gave us something. A direction? Number A circle, he tapped the desk. We have the chef, the ghostwriter, the ex-wife, the protégé. A wheel of influence rotating around one missing man. He looked at the timer again, and the ticking continues. Saul didn't come back until well after dark. I heard his knock, soft and patterned, the kind that said he had something worth not interrupting dinner for, but that Wolfe needed to hear now. Fritz answered, nodded once, and pointed him toward the office. I met him in the hallway and caught a glimpse of his expression, tight, unreadable, with just a trace of dry amusement in the corner of his mouth. That alone told me he'd found something. Wolfe was seated at his desk with a glass of milk, which he only drank when his digestion had been offended. He looked up, gestured to the chair opposite him, and Saul sat down with a quiet grunt. Well? Wolfe asked. Jonas Venn's clean, Saul said. Too clean. Wolfe tilted his head. He's running Crux with the efficiency of a man who's terrified of stepping out of line. Staff's quiet. Floor manager is his wife. Payroll's tight. Inventory locked like a bank vault. He talks like a monk. But, I said, he sent someone to Maison Verte. Saul nodded. Confirmed. Harper Chen. She's the one you want to lean on. Wolfe tapped the armrest of his chair with 2 fingers. She there tonight? Number she left early. Sick, supposedly. But when I checked, she was sitting alone in a noodle bar in Bushwick, looking like she was rehearsing a confession. What kind of confession? Wolfe asked. She's scared. Not guilty, scared. She's been deleting messages. I saw her check her phone 7 times in 10 minutes and not answer once. Was she expecting someone? I asked. She's avoiding someone, or something. Did you speak to her? I waited. She left through the back, cab toward Red Hook. I followed, but she gave me the slip. Wolfe didn't flinch, but his brow furrowed slightly. We must move faster, he said. If Ramsey is alive, he must be under duress. If dead, the illusion cannot be maintained forever. Either way, our adversary's window is closing, and they know it. I sat forward. So what now? Find Miss Chen. Bring her here. She has a piece placed late on the board. I want to know why. Saul nodded. I'll need access to her last knowns. You'll have it, Wolfe said. Archie? Already on it. I went to the phone, got Lon Cohen on the line, and pulled some strings. In return for a few thin promises about Wolfe's eventual statement to the press, should the case erupt publicly, I got Harper Chen's work history, emergency contacts, and a recent address registered to a converted warehouse in Gowanus. Saul was gone before I hung up. Wolfe didn't say much after that. He sat in silence, thinking, his eyes on the egg timer as if waiting for it to tick again or shatter. I sat in the red chair and watched him do his best work, which is to say, absolutely nothing, except mentally rearrange the chessboard the rest of us were still trying to find the edges of. By the time Saul returned, nearly 2 hours later, his expression had changed. She came willingly, he said. Harper Chen entered behind him. Young, sharply drawn, hair in a severe braid, face pale and not just from the humidity. She wasn't trying to hide her anxiety. She wore it like a second coat. And whatever she was about to say, she'd decided to say it before Saul even opened his mouth. Wolfe gestured for her to sit. She didn't take the red chair. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands on her knees like a student waiting to be told she'd failed a class. I didn't kill him, she said immediately, but I know who might have wanted to. That's not an answer, Wolfe said. That's a preamble. She closed her eyes and steadied herself. I was at Maison Verte. I was supposed to taste, observe, and report. Jonas didn't want to attend, but he wanted to know if Clément still had his edge. He didn't trust the critics, to be honest. Was Ramsey expected? I saw him arrive. He looked old, angry, but quiet. That's what I remember most. He didn't say a word to anyone, just sat down and waited. You served him? But I watched. He ate one bite, then he left. And you followed him? Yes. Why? She looked at Wolfe. Because someone else followed him too. Wolfe leaned slightly forward. Who? She hesitated, then said, Lola Ramsey. That landed like a dropped glass. I didn't speak. Wolfe didn't blink. She was there, Harper said. In the corner, wearing a shawl, watching. I didn't recognize her at first. But later, when I saw her name on the early articles, I put it together. She was already there before Ramsey arrived, watching. Then, when he stood, she stood. She followed him out. You're certain? Yes. Wolfe turned to me. Archie. On it, I said, and left the room. Upstairs, I found Lola where she'd been staying the last day and a half. Wolfe had offered her a guest room, which she accepted with the gratitude of someone used to being forgotten. I knocked once and opened the door. She looked up from the chair by the window. I need you downstairs, I said. She studied me for a moment. He knows. Yes. She stood slowly, folded her shawl, and followed me without another word. Back in the office, Wolfe said nothing as she entered. He simply gestured toward the red chair. I followed him, she said before anyone asked. I waited outside Maison Verte. I wanted to see how he looked at Clément's food. I wanted to know if he'd changed. And did he? Wolfe asked. He was exactly the same. Cold, cool, contained, in control. That's what made me furious. You entered his home later? Yes. What time? Just after 10. And he was there? Yes. Alive. Angry. We argued. You said you found him dead. I lied. I stepped forward, but Wolfe waved me back. He was drunk, she said. More than I'd ever seen. He was ranting about Clement, about the egg, about how even silence had betrayed him. He was unraveling. He accused me of watching him fail. Did you kill him? Number 1 left. When? After midnight. Was he alive when you left? Yes. Then who returned afterward? She looked up slowly. I don't know. Are you certain? I'm certain he was breathing when I walked out the door. Wolfe turned to Saul. Get confirmation. Look for a doorman, a neighbor, a camera. Find out who entered that building between midnight and dawn. Saul left. Wolfe turned to Lola. You may remain in the guest room. You will not leave this house without permission. She nodded, but her face had already drifted into shadow. When she was gone, Wolfe stared at the egg timer again. The timer wasn't left for us, he said softly. It was left for her. What do you mean? I asked. Someone wanted her to find it, to feel guilt, to say nothing. Why? Because she was the only one who wouldn't know what it meant. I looked at him. You're saying the egg was never about Ramsey? He closed his eyes, his voice low. I'm saying it was about timing, about someone knowing exactly when Lola would return, and what she wouldn't recognize. I said nothing. But in my gut, the second hand began to move again. The next morning began in silence, which meant Wolfe was thinking, and Fritz was furious. Breakfast was an eggless affair. Toast, bitter coffee, a refusal to discuss the lack of protein. Wolfe had risen early, or rather had not slept, and the mood in the brownstone hovered somewhere between premonition and mourning. I didn't ask what he was thinking. I knew the signs. His silence was not brooding. It was digestion, the mental kind. Something had shifted last night when Lola told the truth, or at least part of it, and Wolfe had filed it away like a clue in the spine of a closed book. By 10 o'clock, Saul returned. He stepped in without knocking, which meant he had more than a hunch. She wasn't lying, he said, dropping into the chair opposite Wolfe. I got a building super who swears he saw Lola leave just after midnight. She was crying, alone. Ramsey's door stayed closed after that. No sign of forced entry, but, Wolfe asked. A neighbor, 2 floors up, couldn't sleep. Claims she saw a man enter the building around 2:15 a.m., slim, early 40s, wearing a cap. Didn't use the buzzer, had a key. Describe the man. White, narrow face, long coat. Moved fast, in and out in 15 minutes. Said she didn't recognize him. Did she see him exit? Number, that's the strange part. Claims she fell asleep around 2:30. When she woke at 5, the door to Ramsey's unit was cracked open. Unusual, Wolfe said. Saul nodded. And there's more. I traced the last known use of Ramsey's credit card. Not for groceries, not for wine. A locksmith, a week before his death. That turned Wolfe's head. Ramsey had his locks changed? Apparently. I spoke to the locksmith. He said Ramsey was jittery. Paid cash for a new high-security set. 4 keys. Took 3 with him. And the 4th? Left it with the building super, just in case. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Find the super, he said. Now. Saul left without another word. I looked at Wolfe. What are you thinking? I'm thinking someone used that 4th key. And the timer. It wasn't meant for us, or for Lola. It was a message, but not about guilt, about rhythm. Meaning. Whoever entered that apartment wanted to be remembered. I leaned forward. Then we have to ask, who would benefit from Ramsey's death, but only if it looked like something else? Wolfe nodded slowly. Someone who needed his silence, or his resurrection. I stood. Time to re-interview everyone? Number just one. Clément? Number Jonas Venn, I frowned. You think he... I think he sent someone to Maison Verte, watched from afar, and suddenly stopped resisting public attention. His name has appeared in 3 online features in the last 48 hours. He's leaning into the spotlight. Because Ramsey is gone. Yes. Then what's the play? You will call Mr. Venn, Wolfe said, and invite him here. Tell him we're writing a retrospective on Ramsey. Say Wolfe intends to contribute his final evaluation. That will intrigue him. And when he comes. Wolfe looked at the timer, still resting silently on the desk. We set the table. I made the call. Jonas Venn answered on the 3rd ring, his voice slick with curiosity and just enough false humility to make a career out of it. When I said Wolfe wanted to discuss Ramsey's legacy, he paused for a beat that felt like calculation disguised as reverence. I'd be honored, he said. This afternoon? 3 o'clock. I'll be there. He was. Jonas Venn entered the brownstone with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to curated lighting. He wore a sand-colored blazer over a black tee, his beard trimmed into a line of pretension. He didn't sit until Wolfe told him to, and when he did, it was with legs crossed, one hand resting lightly on his knee like it was waiting to make a point. Mr. Wolfe, he said, smiling just enough. I never thought I'd sit in this room. That makes 2 of us, Wolfe said flatly. I heard about Duncan. Terrible thing. He could be challenging, but he was a voice, a sharp one. You were once his protege? Wolfe said. Yes, briefly, until I became a threat. You flatter yourself, Wolfe said without looking up. Ramsey was impervious to threat. He responded only to disappointment. Jonas blinked. That's fair. You sent Harper Chen to Maison Verte? Yes. I wanted eyes on the food. I trusted her palate. She followed Ramsey. So she says. Were you expecting that? Number 1 assumed Ramsey wouldn't bother showing up. But he did. And now he's gone. Wolfe leaned back. Your establishment, Crux, has received considerable attention since. I didn't plan that. No, Wolfe said. But you anticipated it. Jonas said nothing. Wolfe gestured to the timer. Do you recognize this? No. It was left at Ramsey's apartment. Do you know what it symbolizes? Jonas squinted at it. Timing. Or precision, or control. Ramsey hated timers. He once said, a real cook knows when the egg is done by instinct, not by numbers. I remember that, Jonas said softly. You quoted it once. In a blog post, Jonas looked up. Wolfe's voice dropped. You knew Ramsey would attack Clément. You wanted that to happen. It would open the path for your own resurrection. I didn't. But Ramsey didn't publish. His editor killed the piece, and that, Mr. Venn, ruined your timetable. So you created a new one. Jonas stood. I think I should go. You will sit, Wolfe said, voice flat and final. Jonas froze, then slowly sank back into the chair. We know you were near the building, Wolfe continued. We know you had access. Chen admitted you kept the 4th key as a precaution, and we know you had motive. I didn't kill him. No, Wolfe said. You merely entered after Lola left. You found him unconscious, perhaps drunk, and you arranged the scene. You removed evidence, left the timer ticking. Jonas said nothing. You didn't intend murder, Wolfe continued. But you wanted silence. You wanted the impression of something finished. Ramsey was a voice that could rise again. You made sure it didn't. Jonas exhaled sharply. He was already gone. Then why hide the body? I didn't want a scandal. I didn't want my name dragged into it. But you left the symbol. Jonas looked at the timer. It felt poetic. Justice, Wolfe said softly, is not poetry. Jonas lowered his eyes. I stepped forward. Where is he? In the East River. Jonas whispered. Wrapped in a painter's tarp. Weighted with cookware. I didn't mean. You meant to vanish him, Wolfe said. But he vanished you. Jonas looked like he was about to collapse. I called Kramer. 20 minutes later, the brownstone was quiet again. Wolfe stared at the now silent timer, then turned to me. I would like eggs tomorrow, he said. Soft-boiled. No timer. Understood, I said. And Archie? Yes. Time, he said, is an ingredient, but never the recipe. Then he closed his eyes, and I let the silence tick on. Jonas Venn's confession hit the city like a sour note in a silent chapel. Kramer showed up in person to take him in. Stiff-jawed and underslept, coat slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning every corner of the brownstone like he expected Wolfe to be hiding another corpse behind the Globe bar. Wolfe offered him nothing but a nod and the quiet satisfaction of having again delivered the package without fingerprints. I walked Kramer to the door. Clean arrest, I said. No struggle. No knife in the back. Not yet, Kramer muttered. But wait until his lawyer starts talking. This won't stay clean. He confessed. He confessed to staging a scene, not a murder. Without a body, it's going to get messy. He told us where the body is. Kramer narrowed his eyes. And if we don't find it? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That silence was Wolfe's currency, and I was learning to spend it. By the time I returned to the office, Wolfe was pouring himself a second glass of milk. The timer still sat on the corner of the desk, untouched. Its ticking had long since stopped, but Wolfe's eyes kept returning to it, like it was still trying to tell him something. He lied, Wolfe said, as I sat down across from him. Jonas? Wolfe nodded once. Not about everything, but about enough. He confessed to covering up a body. He didn't say when. I blinked. You think Ramsey was alive when Jonas entered? No, Wolfe said. I think Jonas found Ramsey already dead, and that changes everything. I felt it then, like a door opening in the wrong direction. You think someone else got there first? Yes. Who? That, Archie, is the final tick. Fritz appeared with a tray, sliced cucumber sandwiches, and a bowl of salted walnuts. Wolfe ignored them. I didn't. Thinking requires fuel, and my fuel burns fast. So Jonas finds the body, I said. Maybe panics, maybe sees opportunity. He arranges the scene to protect himself and to shift suspicion. But if he didn't kill Ramsey, then someone did. And we've just handed the wrong man to Kramer. No, Wolfe said. We handed him a man, not the man. He picked up the egg timer and held it in both hands. This was not Jonas's touch. He's too theatrical in the wrong ways. He thinks in movements, not symbols. This, he turned the timer slowly. This was meant to be seen by someone who would understand its meaning but not its origin. Lola? Yes. I leaned forward. Then we go back to her? Wolfe shook his head. Number, we asked the one person who stayed silent too long. I paused. Clément? Wolfe's eyes met mine. Bring him. It was the second time in 2 days I had to make that call. Clément didn't argue. He said nothing at all, just hung up after I gave him the time. When he arrived, he looked different, drawn tighter at the edges, His coat had specks of flour on the cuffs, and he wore no pin, no garnish. He entered the office like a man walking into his own autopsy. "You asked for me?" he said. "I did," Wolfe said. Clement sat without invitation. Wolfe didn't comment. "We've learned," Wolfe said calmly, "that Duncan Ramsay changed his locks a week before his death." Clement's expression didn't move. "You were not aware?" "No. But you were aware that he kept old grudges." Clement nodded once, and that he could not resist an audience. Again, a nod. Wolfe placed the timer in the center of the desk. "You gave him one of these once." Clement looked at it. "Not that one. But similar." "Oui, a joke. He called it ridiculous. I left it behind." "It stayed with him. Perhaps." "And when you returned?" "I didn't return," Clement said sharply. "You think I followed him home?" "I think you never stopped following him. Not with your feet, but with your thoughts." Clement exhaled. "Of course I did. He destroyed you. Twice. But you returned. I earned that. And then he came to your opening, ate one bite, and left. You did not follow?" "No." "You did not send anyone after him?" "No." Wolfe's voice dropped. "Then why was your fingerprint on the inside of the egg timer?" Clement froze. "It wasn't Jonas's," Wolfe said. "It wasn't Lola's. We dusted it an hour ago. One clean print under the winding dial. Yours?" Clement didn't speak. "Why return it to him?" Wolfe asked. Clement looked at the timer. "Because he needed to remember that his time, his reign, was over." "So you entered the apartment?" "Yes." "When?" "After Lola, after Jonas." "And he was dead?" "No," Clement said. "He was dying." I stood, heart thudding. "You watched him die?" "He was on the floor, breathing but shallow. There was a bottle. I thought perhaps it was a stroke or—" "Poison?" Wolfe asked. "I didn't know." "But you didn't help him." Clement looked away. He had ruined so many lives, taken so many voices. I thought, let him face the silence. "You wound the timer?" Clement nodded. "I didn't kill him," he said, "but I didn't save him." Wolfe leaned back. "You arranged the kitchen?" "Number it was already bare. But I set the timer. I wanted—" He swallowed. "I wanted it to be known that he died on someone else's time." "Your time," I said. Clement looked at me. Number his own silence. Wolfe finally nodded. "You will write a statement?" "I will." When he left, Wolfe said nothing for a long time. I sat there, staring at the timer, which suddenly looked heavier than it had before. "So, Ramsay," I said, "was never murdered?" "No," Wolfe said quietly. "He died of drink, of pride, and of time." And 3 people tried to rewrite that ending. Each for their own reasons, each afraid of what the truth would cost. And what did it cost? Wolfe picked up the timer. "Dignity," he said. "And perhaps finally, the taste of justice." The next morning broke quietly, as if the city itself had taken a long breath and forgotten to let it out. The sun crept across the parquet floor in Wolfe's office like a cautious observer. I was already at my desk when Wolfe entered. No dramatic entrance, no trailing words of victory. He simply walked in, sat, and closed his eyes. That's how I knew the case was over. But not finished. There's a difference. A case can be over when the truth is found. Finished, though, that takes something else. Closure, order, balance. Wolfe insists on all 3 in that order. So I sat there, waiting for his first words, as I've done in the wake of more tangled stories than I care to count. They didn't come. It wasn't until Fritz arrived with coffee, and Wolfe grunted that I realized we were already into the aftermath. I broke the silence. Kramer called. Wolfe's eyes stayed shut. Of course. They found the body, just as Jonas said. East River tarp, weights. Coroner said it wasn't drowning, alcohol poisoning, high-proof bourbon, and an empty stomach. Fitting, Wolfe muttered. He died alone. No, Wolfe corrected. He died surrounded by those who could have saved him and chose not to. That's a different kind of solitude. I let that hang in the air for a minute. Wolfe didn't blink. Clement turned in his written statement, I added. He left town last night. France. Let him go, Wolfe said. He's not running. He's returning to silence. Lola's still upstairs. Wolfe opened his eyes. She may remain. She is owed more than the world gave her. She lied to us. She was lied to first. I leaned back, letting the weight of that land. Wolfe's sense of justice was rarely emotional. But when it was, it came down like the final course in a meal you didn't know was missing. I called Ramsey's editor, I said. Told him the piece wouldn't be running. He asked why. I told him Ramsey had already written his last review, and it was of himself. Wolfe didn't smile. He never does at that sort of thing. But I saw the small twitch in the corner of his mouth. What about Venn? I asked. Kramer has enough to charge him with obstruction, Wolfe said. But no murder. He'll serve time or he won't. Either way, he'll never serve a meal worth remembering. And Chen? She'll testify if needed, but she was never more than an errand. And Durant? She has her story. She'll write it one day. And when she does, it will taste bitter. There was another silence then, not awkward, just cooling. Like the end of a meal when everyone knows there's no dessert. I rose and walked to the desk, picked up the egg timer, still resting where Wolfe had left it. It was silent now, unwound, but I could still feel the echo of its ticking. The way it had counted down something we hadn't seen until it had already passed. You want me to throw this out? Wolfe opened one eye. No, he said. Put it in the drawer. I did. He closed his eyes again. I moved toward the door. Archie, he said softly. Yes? Time is neither enemy nor ally. It is witness. I nodded. That was all he had to say. And that was the last thing either of us said about Duncan Ramsey, about the night he fell, about the many hands that helped him down or failed to lift him up. We never spoke again of the egg timer. But I remembered the way it ticked, steady, cold, indifferent, like truth, like Wolfe, like the kind of justice that doesn't always look like a courtroom or a confession or even a solved case. Sometimes it looks like a silent brownstone, a man at peace in a chair, and an egg timer that ticked too long. The day after Clement's departure, after Jonas had traded his designer apron for a holding cell, and after the city had resumed pretending that death was something that happened elsewhere, Wolfe called Lola Ramsey into the office for the last time. She came down quietly, hair tied back, her face composed not with peace, but something close to resignation. She sat in the red chair without being asked. Wolfe remained behind his desk, a small stack of papers beside him, the egg timer no longer present. I stood at my usual post near the bookshelves, arms folded, watching the final dish come together. Mrs. Ramsey, Wolfe said, I owe you a truth, and in return, I require one. She nodded. All right. Your husband was not murdered. She didn't move. He drank himself into collapse. By the time Jonas Venn arrived, yes, he was there. Duncan was already beyond saving. Jonas merely removed the distractions. A body, a bottle. The last mess left by a man who styled himself as a critic of order, yet lived in chaos. Lola's eyes stayed on Wolfe. And the timer? Wolfe's fingers tapped the blotter softly. That was Clement. A final flourish. Not a threat, not a signature, a reflection. He didn't poison your husband, or strike him, or silence him. He merely observed the end. And me? She asked. Wolfe paused. You were the first to see him undone, but not the one who undid him. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She looked at Wolfe like he'd handed her something she hadn't wanted but finally recognized as hers. He continued. You lied because you believed you might be blamed. But you weren't alone in that. Everyone who came near Duncan Ramsay in the last 24 hours of his life carried guilt, if not responsibility. And each of them tried to rewrite the ending in their favor. She gave a faint smile. And what makes your version the truth? Wolfe didn't blink. Because I am the only one who did not try to change it. She stood slowly. Is that all? One thing more, Wolfe said. The timer, it was set to 20 minutes. She frowned. What does that mean? It means, Wolfe said, someone expected the end to arrive precisely, and that is never how death works. She left the room quietly. When the door clicked shut behind her, Wolfe let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. Well, I said, that wraps it up in a sad little bow. No, Wolfe replied. It leaves it unwound, as most human stories are. I looked at the cleared desk. And the egg timer? Returned, he said, to Clement. I sent it with a note. What did you say? I thanked him. For what? For not interrupting. That was Wolfe. No ceremony, no flourish. Just an understanding that truth, like timing, is best handled with restraint. That justice, when properly observed, does not need to be shouted. And that sometimes, all you can do is let the seconds tick down and recognize the shape of what remains. I left him there, watching the light bend across his orchids, the hum of the city muffled by the glass and curtains of a world that runs on silence, intellect, and ritual. The case was closed, and for once, the only thing left ticking was the clock, 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 was the clock.